So, hi, my name is Aarin Bothra. I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior at Oswego East High School in Oswego, Illinois, which is about an hour away from Chicago. I intern at Innovation World, so this is my fourth gift. In the past, I've done a couple presentations and I've co-hosted at them, so I'm really excited to be giving this presentation today. So the title of this presentation is The Power of Learning a Foreign Language. So ever since I've been a kid, I've been really interested in learning foreign languages, and language learning in general. So I'm here at this gift, sharing what I've learned, opportunities that I found, and just why I think it's important in general. So just to talk a little bit about my language learning journey, I began learning Spanish in middle school. So I think that's very common for a lot of my classmates and in the US. A lot of us begin learning Spanish in either middle school or high school. So that's kind of where my journey started. I've been learning Spanish for about 6 years now, and I've reached high intermediate advanced level. But during the pandemic, I began learning Japanese. It was a language I was interested in just because at the time, a lot of Japanese culture was really popular. And when I started learning a little bit more about the language, I found it very interesting. So I started self-studying Japanese almost 4 years ago. And recently I received the Japanese and Spanish Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy, which is kind of what all of this learning has culminated to. And then recently, I've started learning Korean and Portuguese out of personal interest. And those are two more languages that I'm interested in, like diving into coming up in the next couple of months. And I should mention that I'm also very interested in linguistics, and that's something I hope to study in college and pursue into the future. And then this year I was accepted into U.S. government funded program, a language immersion program called the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, for Korean. I'll be going to South Korea for 6 weeks over the summer to study the language there, and live with the host family. So that's another part of my presentation that I'll be talking about a little later. Opportunities like this that are funded by the U.S. government, that I've done NISLI, well, I will be doing NISLI. So I'll be talking about that, but also other opportunities for anyone listening. So that's a little bit about my language learning journey.
Aren't you missing a language?
Oh yeah, I also speak Hindi because I'm Indian. So yeah, I forgot about that. So yeah, let's move on. So I'm gonna start by talking a little bit about the benefits of a bilingual brain. I think there's a lot of research into the topic of why learning foreign languages is important. The traditional education system in a lot of schools does prioritize foreign languages, but a lot of times it's not taught to us why we're actually learning them. It just seems like another subject we have to put into our schedule to fill space. But I think it's very important to understand what are the benefits of learning a language, because there's a lot of people who are interested in self-studying them, but there's also a lot of people who feel forced to do them by the school system. I think it's important to realize why we do this. So I think some of the main benefits of learning language learning that I put here, the first thing is that it enhances cognitive ability. Obviously, learning another language, you're learning grammar, you're learning vocab, and you're learning all these different skills that are helping your problem solving abilities at the end of the day. You're recognizing new grammar, you're recognizing patterns. So this is all helping sharpen your brain for other subjects. So it improves your memory, your attention, your problem solving, because it all language includes all of our senses and all of our different functions of our brain when we learn one, because it's the way people communicate in their day-to-day life. So I think it's very important to realize that it doesn't just help you in speaking this language and communicating with a certain set of people, but it helps you in all of the different subjects that you're interested in, whether that be science, math, English, all of that. The second thing that I think it's important to realize is that it also increases your cultural empathy and understanding. And this may be something that a lot of times we're unaware of when we're learning a language. But it's important to realize that by learning this language, you're interacting with another culture and you're learning about a different set of people and how they view the world. So it's important that this is obviously increasing your empathy and understanding of these different cultures. You're getting more attuned to another set of views that might be a little bit different from yours, might be different to what you're accustomed to. And by learning the words and how people express different things, I think it's a really great thing. And it increases your understanding without you even having to actively work for it. Um, the third thing is that obviously language learning is a skill. Not everyone can speak multiple languages, and for that reason, it opens up a lot of academic and professional opportunities. Lots of times we're told in class that if you had two equal candidates, but one could speak the other language and that language is necessary for whatever field you're in, they choose the candidate who can speak that language. And I think that's definitely true in a lot of professional opportunities that involve language learning. People see it as a skill, a valuable skill, so it's great for professional opportunities. But it's the same for academic opportunities. There's lots of things you can do with study abroad, language immersion, or going to different countries that I'll be talking about later. But the bottom line is it also just increases your analytical skills, so it's good regardless. And finally, it improves communication skills across the board because to learn a language, you have to speak it if you want to learn that part of the language. And that increases your communication skills, learning to talk with people when there might be a language barrier or a gap, learning how to overcome that and persevere, and then also learning how to communicate your thoughts when you may not have the most robust vocabulary. You really have to be able to understand what you want to say and distill it down to the most basic level. So in general, it will improve your communication skills definitely in English and in all the other languages because you're getting more attuned to how to communicate with other people and really get the point that you want to say across. And this graphic on the right, I really like. It shows like the human brain with all the different components that language learning impacts, and you can see that there's reading, comprehension, cultural awareness, thinking skills, all of that. So these are some of the main benefits of language learning. And now to back that up with a little bit more of like statistics and some more thoughts and research, here's a couple of different areas that I thought were very interesting that language learning benefits you in. Um, the first being standardized testing. So a lot of times high schoolers and middle schoolers are learning languages, and we also have our standardized tests. Now, obviously, standardized tests are very controversial, but a lot of people still want to score well on them. So it's been found that research has found that bilingual individuals often perform better on standardized tests. Quote, this is because bilingual education promotes critical thinking and a deeper understanding of the subject matter. And this is from a research paper. And I definitely agree. I feel like learning these languages, you have to really be able to think critically because you can't just memorize what you're learning. You have to understand it because it's a way of how people speak. So I think that definitely helps with standardized testing across the board. A second thing is cognitive benefits, and this is moving more into old age and different the cognitive delays that might be coming on. So it can delay the onset of cognitive decline. Recent studies suggest that speaking two or more languages may significantly delay the onset of dementia by up to 5 years. And I think this is also a benefit that not a lot of people talk about, but it's still really important. And I think it just again goes to show how much it's improving your brain. You're doing so many different skills that it's helping sharpen your brain to help prevent things like dementia and other things. And then finally, studies have found that there's a strong correlation between multilingual learners and people who perform better in academics in general. And this is usually because to learn the language, you have to prove that you have to have flexibility and this ability to thrive when you don't really know exactly what's going on and you might be confused at times. So I think by learning another language, you're developing skills that are really important for the future. And yeah, I think this is another aspect that I touched on a little bit more before, but the cultural empathy that comes through language learning, I think, is its biggest strength. Because you obviously learn a language maybe because you like how it sounds or you want to go to that country. But the biggest part is that language is just our manifestation of our culture. It's how we view our world and put it into terms that other people understand. So by learning a language, it gives you a deeper understanding of another world, another culture's etiquettes, biases, and beliefs. And it facilitates meaningful communication with people from diverse backgrounds. By learning just one language, you're opening the doors to talking to thousands, millions of people that you wouldn't have been able to speak to before. And it encourages open-mindedness and global awareness. By learning a language, you pick up on the cultural nuance, and that in turn makes you more open-minded. So I'm gonna go and move on to now that you know a little bit of the benefits of why language learning can be so important, I'm gonna move on to if you want to learn a language, you have an interest, where do you start? So a lot of people think that you need a teacher or a tutor or some kind of set structure to learn a language, but that definitely is not true. Language learning can definitely be done by yourself, as I did with Japanese, and I'm now doing with Korean. It's something that you can definitely do by yourself. So I would say that the biggest thing is that you're choosing a language you're interested in, not a language that you're being forced to learn, something that you have a genuine interest in. And it doesn't matter what the reason is, as long as there's a strong motivation, whether that be professional opportunities, you really like the culture, you just like the language, something like that. So once you have a good language in mind, and that can be done with a little bit of research, figuring out which language would be the best for you, how much time do you have, is it a really big commitment, is it very complicated for whatever native language you speak? And then I would start by setting specific, achievable goals. Um, a lot of times, and especially at the beginning of my journey, I really wanted to like just. I thought it would be very fast. Like in 6 months, I would be able to speak the language fluently and have a fluent conversation. But that's really not possible. Obviously, as native speakers, we spend our entire lives learning our language and we still make mistakes every day. So I think the biggest thing is setting specific achievable goals. And that means trying to improve in one area, but not getting angry at yourself if you're not able to perfectly speak the language in 6 months. Maybe in 6 months, you want to reach a level where you can understand this certain level of content. You can understand like kids' cartoons and you can hold a basic conversation or form basic sentences. So once you have achievable goals that you've written down for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, making sure that you're covering all of your bases, the best thing to do is to start practicing consistently, even if briefly. So if that means for each day you can only practice 10 minutes, the biggest thing is that you build consistency because language learning comes from consistently reinforcing what you've learned and immersing yourself in the culture. It doesn't come from studying for 5 hours one day, then studying for 5 hours again the next week. You're not going to pick up fluency like that. You have to do it every day because obviously we're surrounded by our native language every day, and that's why we know it so well. And for that, you might be saying, well, I'm going to do it every day for 10 minutes, but what do I do? Well, I would say that the best thing that I've learned and seen is to just choose a beginner resource and do the whole thing. You don't have to go and look for the best textbook, the best course, the best method, so that in 6 months it promises you that you'll be fluent because there really isn't anything like that. At the beginning of my Japanese learning journey, I tried a bunch of different resources because I kept trying to look for the best textbook, and I only really started seeing progress when I just picked one and did the whole thing. And then when I look back, I can say, oh, well, that one would have been the best for me. But you can't do that when you just start. So I think it's really important to choose a resource that you like, that you know you can do, and just do the whole thing. Because obviously, it'll be helping you build the foundation, and you can go back and continue to build onto it. So it's best to build consistency by choosing something and doing it, and not worrying too much about like how efficient is this? Because the point is to learn, not to be the most efficient. That's something that comes as you become more just you know the language more. And then another thing is, I would really say engage with native content. This can be hard when you're at a beginner level because you obviously don't understand the majority of the words. And native content is very different from what you find in textbooks. There's lots of slang. It's very different from what they teach in the classrooms. That's the same for Spanish. When I first started studying Spanish outside of the classroom, I couldn't understand anything. Even though in my classroom I was like considered intermediate, I couldn't even understand some of the most basic Spanish just because of how different it is. And that's why I think if you're self-studying or even if you're learning with a teacher, it's important to start studying with native content from the start. And that doesn't mean you have to understand most of it. You just have to get used to the sounds, get used to the rhythm, and over time you'll start building up that understanding. And I realized that for Spanish, one day as I kept listening to it, I would start to understand more and more to the point where I was able to start understanding native content. And that I kind of saw exponential growth after there. So I would make sure to not just be like in your textbook bubble, in your learner bubble, kind of expand into native content. And then another thing that I think is very common but is good advice is when you're learning, you can use like rote memorization where you're just doing flashcards over and over again. But I think I would recommend that you use a spaced repetition system. The most popular is something called Anki, and especially a spaced repetition system is a flashcard system where you have an app or an application or some kind of website where you go and each day it has a set of flashcards that you have to do. But how it works is that you say that you got this flashcard wrong by saying it was very hard for you, hard, easy, or very easy. And based on your inputs each day, it spaces out your flashcards to the like optimal intervals that it has in its algorithm to make sure that it's showing you the flashcard just when you're about to forget it so that you remember it again and then it keeps going. So it's been proven by a lot of research studies to make you memorize things at a much faster rate because it's optimized and it's a computer program for that reason. So using something like Anki or just searching up a spaced repetition system would really be helpful. And then finally, this is the tip that I didn't actually know um or a thing that I didn't really realize until a little bit later, but it's to focus on learning the most common grammar and words in context. When I started Japanese, I would just learn like single words. Like I would learn like water is this, a book is this. But it's very difficult because not all languages, our definitions are the same. This language isn't just English with different letters. It's a different language and there's different context to it. So you definitely need to make sure you're learning this word in context because this word might only be used in this certain case where in English it could be used in both cases or vice versa. So it's very important that you're learning in context and not just learning one word, one word, one word. And when you start, you obviously have to learn single words, but as you get to a even low beginner level, you want to start putting things in sentences and seeing what the context is. Because without the context, in a conversation, you could be using all the wrong words because you don't know what context to use them in. And this is another benefit of language learning little graph that I thought was very pretty, and it shows how in all the different stages of our life, there's different benefits from learning languages. which I think is a great reason to start early. But there's no time that's too late because it benefits you at all stages of your life. So again, this is kind of just going back to what I said in the last section, but even giving some more information about that. So in terms of like media and content, I think watching TV shows, movies, YouTube, podcasts, and any other content in your target language is a great thing to do. But obviously, this means these are all forms of media we use on our regular day-to-day life. So it's going to be advanced content. So that's why I recommend you do both intensive and non-intensive practice. So essentially that would mean like if you have all of these different resources, one day you sit down and you watch a 10-minute YouTube video and you pause each sentence and you try to understand it exactly, and that would be intensive practice. But that can be very tiring and you might get bored of it. So you should also do non-intensive practice where you're just watching for the fun of it. You're not watching to understand every single word, every single grammar point. You're just trying to get the general flow of it. And by combining both of these, your comprehension will increase overall, but you also be learning specific new words. Um, the same thing goes for books and reading. If you've acquired a solid base in the language, reading generally requires you to have a little bit more of a base in the language just because there's not as many visual cues and it's a little bit harder. So once you've chosen a book or you're ready to start reading, you might want to choose a book that you've already read in English or something that you're familiar with like the story of so that you're not feeling that it's unenjoyable because you have no idea what's going on. And you want to work through the story. And again, you can do the same intensive, non-intensive method where maybe you read the first 10 pages and try to understand all of the key new words, and then you read the next 10 pages and you're not trying to search anything up. You're just trying to understand the general gist of what's happening. And if there's a word or two you don't know, you can just skip them. And as long as you understand what's happening, it's fine. And trying to only search up the words that are key to the story is very important because if you try to search up every word that you don't know, you'll never get through the book. And then the final thing is language exchange. So interacting with native speakers is a great way to build your speaking skills, but that also increases your listening, and that in turn increases your reading and writing. So this could be done through language exchange apps. There's free apps called Hello Talk, and there's other ones you can download off the App Store where it's like a messaging app, and you can find people who want to learn your language, and you're learning their native language, and you can message with them. You could also get a native language tutor through online platforms, maybe that be in person, or a platform that I use is called italki, which I'll be talking about on the next slide, where you can get a native language tutor. So yeah, here are some more like resources now. So there's a bunch of apps for language learning, and I know a lot of people think that if you find the perfect app, as long as you do their course every day, you'll learn the language. A lot of the time that isn't true. One app usually isn't enough to encompass or teach you everything. But these apps like Duolingo, Memorize, Lingo Dear, Closemaster, they're great for getting started because on the way to work or something or on the way to school, you can just do it for 5 minutes on your phone. And it's a great way to get your feet wet and start learning the language, but I wouldn't rely only on apps. But a lot of these apps are great. They have their pros and cons, so I would just make sure to research before you use them. The second thing I was talking about was italki and language tutors. Italki is an online platform where you can find affordable tutors from any country around the world that speak any language, and you can book them for whatever classes they have. I've done that for Japanese recently, where I found a Japanese teacher and we do conversation practice for 1 hour a week, and it's usually pretty affordable. But don't think that you need to have a teacher to start learning a language. That's definitely not true. For the last 4 years, I haven't had a teacher, and it's been fine. But at the later stages, it can be very helpful. And the final thing that I think is often overlooked is using YouTube. I mean, YouTube is a great resource for something like this just because of there's a bunch of native content and YouTube has all different languages. So it's really great in general. And there's all of this. You can find free lessons, native content, immersion for every level with grammar breakdowns and everything. So just use YouTube to your benefit because that can be very helpful. Okay. And now for some challenges that you face, and then we'll move on to some other topics about language learning. I mean, obviously, it's very challenging. That's why not everyone knows every language in the world. But here are just some basic ones that I think it's important to mention. Obviously, the first one, which goes for literally anything new that you learn, is mistakes. Don't feel, even after you reach the most advanced level and you think that you're native, you'll still make mistakes. As long as you're making mistakes, that means you're progressing. So it's definitely necessary. As long as you're making mistakes, it means that you're trying new things, you're trying out new structures, and it's better to keep making mistakes so that you can learn how the language works. And it's good that you can correct your mistakes and see the different nuances of the language. So definitely don't ever feel that you shouldn't be making mistakes because you're at too high of a level. That's definitely not true, and it's necessary to learning a language. The second thing that's also true for many learning new things is a learning plateau. So a lot of people, which is true for almost all languages, is that you start at zero and then in a very short span of time you get to this level where you feel like you're like an intermediate level. It's like a curve like that. It feels like you gain so much knowledge in just such a short time. But then after that, say you go from in 1 year you go from beginner to intermediate, but then it might take you 3 or 4 years to go from intermediate to advanced. And that's because at a lot of after you gain most of the beginning common knowledge, a lot of the knowledge after that, it feels like it's invisible. It does you can't see the improvements in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day speaking. But it's just about the consistency. As long as you keep doing it, these small little things add up, and then at some level you'll realize that yeah, I did gain something over all these years. But it can a lot of times after you've reached and like went over the beginner level, it can feel like it's starting to slow down, but it's important to keep your motivation and consistency going. And then the final thing is feeling lost. A lot of times once we've learned a lot, or even when we're beginning, and we find new content and we seem to understand it all, then we move on to the next level. And then when we go to the next level, it's all new and we feel like we haven't learned anything. And I think it's really important to focus on the small wins. So even if you go to the next level and you can't understand any of it, at least you understood the level before. And I think it's important to continue reviewing and spending as much time as you need at each step of the process and not trying to like go as fast as you can through it, because as long as you keep doing and reviewing and working slowly, you'll start to build up momentum and you'll reach much more advanced levels of your language learning. So this is those were some of the tips for how to start self-learning a language, but obviously there's a lot of opportunities as I mentioned in the beginning that go along with this. So now I'll be talking about a few of these. A lot of these are US government focused or funded, but there's I'll be talking about opportunities that are available all across the world as well. And a lot of this information can be found on your your country's government or local governments like pages. They might have language immersion opportunities, scholarships, and things of that nature. Sorry. So the first program that I'll be talking about is the National Security Initiative for Youth, which is called NISLI. It's a program that I'll be doing this summer, and it's funded by the U.S. Department of State, so the U.S. government. Essentially, what it is a language immersion program where students live with host families and take intensive classes, and it's designed to build real-world fluency and cross-cultural understanding. So essentially, they have academic year programs and they have summer programs where you go to this country and you stay there for 6 to 7 weeks for the summer program and one full school year for the academic year program. And you live with the host family that they have interviewed and chosen. And there you each day you go to language class and you do 5 to 6 hours of language instruction. And the whole point is that you're living in this new country so you can understand the culture. And it's very focused on getting you to learn the language. It's offered by the U.S. Department of State for languages they think will be important in the future for the U.S.'s interest. And all costs are covered. It's a scholarship. And essentially, a lot of people say that when they go there, they start at zero of knowing a language and they go to the intermediate level. So it's a really great opportunity if you want to learn more about a country, its culture, or you want to work in the U.S. Department of State in the future because this program is something they highly value for opportunities that they have in the future. Um, so I'm really excited for this because I'll be doing Korean, and the reason I chose Korean is because I think it'll be useful for my future aspirations in environmental science, as Korea is a leading country in environmental science. But it's also very good in my because I want to learn Korean in general, and I want to be immersed in the culture of another country. So some of the languages they have that you can apply for are Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Persian, Russian, and Turkish. And they have all of the summer programs for these languages, and they have most languages have an academic year program. So if you're watching and you're a high schooler in the United States, I definitely encourage you to check these programs out and apply, because even if you've never thought about language learning before, this can be a great opportunity and you really will learn so much. And yeah, so this is my program. I'll be going to South Jeonju, South Korea, which is near Seoul. And as I've talked about previously, I'm very excited. And then these are some other US government funded programs that are similar to NISLI. NISLI obviously focuses on a certain set of countries, but these programs cover other countries. As I mentioned before, if you don't live in the US for all of our international viewers, you can find other similar opportunities on your government's websites if they have them. And I think that's a great thing to definitely check out. So I'll just be quickly going through these. We have Yes Abroad, which is a US program for countries with a significant Muslim population. And these are for high schoolers. Flex Abroad is for high schoolers who want to study in countries of the former Soviet Union. So that's most of East Europe. The CBYX program is for Germany specifically. And then these two bottom ones here are very popular programs that undergraduates in college and graduates do. What is the Critical Language Scholarship? They have a bunch of different countries where you can go for the summer as an undergraduate or graduate, and you live and their summer language programs. And then finally, the Fulbright Scholarship is a very prestigious scholarship at the graduate or after college level, where you do research and you study and have teaching opportunities. And they have countries all across the world. So if you do something like NISLE or one of these other programs, it can definitely help you reach Fulbright if that's one of your goals. And Fulbright is a great way. It's a great like resume builder. It's a great experience, but it's also a great resume builder if you want to go into a foreign exchange career where you might be working as an ambassador or something like that. And then another thing that I wanted to talk about and highlight during this presentation was language competitions and challenges. Because a lot of the people who are learning languages, they are obviously interested in their language, but they also may be interested in linguistics in general. And linguistics is the study of how languages function and how we as humans, why we have different languages and what we're trying to convey. So this is a very popular competition that's available in almost all countries that I think is great for international high schoolers. It's called the International Linguistics Olympiad. So just like it's one of the 13 science Olympiads in the world, just like we have our math Olympiad, our chemistry, our biology, it focuses on solving linguistics puzzles, and you don't have to have any prior like knowledge of the language. It's more about pattern recognition, like decoding things, and it's really great if you're interested in linguistics and want to study that in the future. US students would do the North American Computational Linguistics Open, which I did this year, and I made it to the next round, and then you can qualify for the international level. But it's open to all high schoolers, and I know that they have qualifying rounds in almost all countries. They have them in the UK, India, Russia, Japan, all of them, Korea. So it's definitely a great opportunity if you're interested in linguistics and understanding languages. Okay, now to kind of end off this presentation, now that you've learned about a couple different opportunities and also how to start self-learning languages, I just wanted to reinforce this all with a couple more statistics that I found very interesting and insightful. So this statistic found that 90% of studies showed that language learners again perform better across academic subjects compared to non-language learners. So this is a really great benefit that a lot of people don't realize. And it's a great way, if you pick up language learning as a hobby, it's sharpening your brain. And that's why I think it's such a valuable and fun and rewarding hobby. Then 56% of US employers said that their need for bilingual employees will increase in the next 5 years. So that's really interesting because learning a language will give you like personal enjoyment, but it'll also give you a competitive edge in the job world, which definitely might be necessary in the future. So that's another great reason to learn a language. And then the final one is bilingual employees in the US can earn more between 5 and 20% more than their monolingual counterparts, which I also thought was very interesting. Again, who doesn't love money? So learning a language definitely has its benefits if you want to make money or get a better job in the future. So there's definitely reasons to invest your time into it beyond personal enjoyment. And finally, I just think that it's very important that if you're deciding to self-learn a language, take advantage of technology. The internet and online resources have made language learning so much more efficient in recent years. So definitely take advantage of all the content that people are putting out onto the internet for everyone to see. There's a lot of great ways to immerse without having to go to a host country. And the internet is making it so that there's a lot less barriers for people who want to learn a new language. And finally, I wanted to end off with this quote from Nelson Mandela. Uh, it says, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart." And I thought this was a really good quote for why a lot of people decide to learn languages and why it's so important. Because it's really, you're communicating with someone on a fundamental level, and it builds cultural empathy, and it can really help you in the future. So I definitely think that language learning has been one of my favorite hobbies. It's really helped shape me as a person. And I definitely recommend for anyone who's looking to get started or wants to learn a language, just do it. And follow whatever tips that you can find. If hopefully something in this presentation helped you. But just get started and you'll start to learn a lot more along the way. Okay. That was just me talking for 30 minutes straight. So let me know if you guys have any questions.
I am speechless in every language.
Thank you.
Alex, any thoughts?
Oh, I've been having a problem because when I go to the Philippines, I start getting good at my native language again, which is Filipino. I haven't been in the Philippines for a while, and I felt like I used that as an excuse to
Mhm.
say that I'm not learning it very well. But
Mhm.
seeing this shows me that there's a lot more things I can do, and there's a lot more benefits like cognitive ability
Mhm.
and especially getting along with my classmates easier.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, I've experienced the same thing because I speak Hindi natively. But a lot of my family lives in India. But when I go there for, like a 1 month in the summer every 2 years, I feel like my Hindi gets really good. But then when I come back, I don't use that much, and then I start to like forget different things. So in recent years, what I started doing is trying to read books in Hindi and trying to keep up with like the culture and calling my family more often to talk in Hindi. And I think that's helped me. But I think it's definitely a struggle between balancing like you're not actually there physically in the country, so it can be definitely hard to like be immersed in the language. But I think over time, as long as you have a consistent routine, you'll be able to improve that language, and it's never too late to actively start studying it. But I think that's a big thing for a lot of people who speak two languages but don't live in that country.
Oh, I have a question.
Hmm.
Um, I've tried to learn other languages too, like Spanish.
Hmm.
The thing I just can't get right is fluency. I try
Hmm.
to kind of squeeze it into a conversation
Hmm.
of like, but first, it keeps being choppy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that's a really big issue. And I mean that's an issue that you'll face for a very long time, most likely. When I started learning, like my Japanese right now, I would still say is very choppy. Like it's gotten less choppy over time, but to any kind of native speaker, it still sounds like I'm a foreigner. And I think that's something that won't go away for a while. Like that's something that you have to power through. Like my Spanish was very choppy for like 5 or 6 years that I was learning, or the last 4 or 5 years. And only in this one year I started to see that I've been able to form more coherent sentences. But the issue about it being choppy is it's proving that you're learning the language and you have to think about it because it's not your native language. But that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, and that's why people spend so much time practicing your speaking. So it's really just about practicing and being consistent. And as long as you keep speaking, at some point you'll reach the level of fluency where you don't have to think about it anymore. But until then, it's going to sound choppy. But a lot of native speakers understand that, and they won't say or they won't make fun of you for that because they understand that it's very hard for you to speak in a language that's not your native language. So I would definitely say power through it.
Arn, what really impressed me was that you were talking about learning a language by speaking the language,
Yeah.
reading the language, doing the language, which is a lot different than the way languages are taught in schools. And if I can just real
Mhm.
quickly share a story. When I was a child, my family lived in Austria and we spoke German. And when I came to the United States in high school, I had to take a language. I'm no fool. I signed up for
Yeah.
German. And one time I came home and I had done very poorly on a German test. And I remember my father yelling at me in German, saying, "How can you do badly in German? Don't you understand what I'm saying?" And the problem was I could speak the language, but
Yeah.
I didn't know the perfect past tense of the
Exactly.
Hagen. I mean, how can you address that problem?
I think that's a really big problem, and I'm like really glad that you brought that up because yeah, in like classes we learn all these textbook like phrases, but then if you ask a native speaker, they don't know what any of them are. If you ask me in English what the present perfect tense is, I couldn't tell you. So I think the biggest thing is that from the classes you can build a very like solid base of like if you sat down and analyzed the language, you'd know why something is the way it is. But definitely to take things into your own hand outside of classes and really try a more like fluid approach where you're speaking the language and you're not so worried about what the name for this grammar point is, just that you're understanding it. But I think that's a really big issue in the United States educational system for a lot of public schools, especially my school, like I see that too. So I hope that's something in the future that can be changed through the work that different people are doing, where we move towards more of a immersion style where we're not just trying to memorize different names. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. So that's why I like
oh,
self-studying too. I think it
yeah,
can be.
it's really cool.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I love the I had an old school before. I started homeschooling. The way they taught French was actually no, not French. French because it was American curriculum, but the main language they wanted to teach is Arabic because I was in Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia. I really felt I studied a lot of Arabic. I was really sick sometimes. I went on Duolingo a lot,
Mhm.
but I went into the class and I really couldn't understand. It really
Yeah.
hit me that after learning this, I think they didn't really just um do it right. They always would just say it and then make whoever raises their hand that they're going to start maybe the conversation there. Eh, maybe I could incorporate this into my school because I can definitely I have been trying to connect with my school a lot and make a lot of events for this summer. And this could be one of them, language learning
Yeah,
with different methods.
yeah, I definitely agree. I think the way that they teach it in schools is they want to fit into that rigid educational structure. But language learning really doesn't work like that. But yeah, I want to thank you guys so much for this present or the opportunity to give me to present. But I don't want to take away any time from the next presenter.
You're not. The next
Oh,
presenter has not shown up.
oh, okay, okay.
And if I can just
Mhm.
give a plug to another country I think is doing it right. The
Yeah.
country Mauritius, they're off
Ooh,
the coast of Africa.
yeah,
And at one point it had been a French colony and a British
yeah,
colony, and close, they're very close to India and
yeah.
Africa. And everyone in the country speaks three languages, at least three. In the schools, every student learns French, they learn English, and then they either learn, Chinese or Hindi or Swahili or something. And it's a wonderful environment because they're flowing freely. There
Mm,
is no native language. It's
exactly.
native languages. And unfortunately, I don't have a video of it, but
Mhm.
I was there once and there were three young students having a conversation. They were talking about sports or something, and each one was speaking a different language. But
Mm,
one of them was speaking Chinese, one was speaking French, one was speaking English, and they all understood each other,
okay. Yeah,
and they just happened to fall into one
yeah,
language or another. But I would love to have the people of Mauritius
yeah.
get the credit for, or maybe somebody, maybe you could, Aaron, go to Mauritius
I
and
could. I mean, that
cultivate
sounds
them.
amazing. Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. I feel like the US education system should take after other countries. Like Mauritius sounds amazing. I know in India, from what I hear from a lot of my family, is that since they were a British colony, a lot of their schools teach in English, but obviously everyone knows Hindi. And then they teach a third like regional language. So I would like to see like US schools prioritize language education more and have a more immersion base, which I've seen a lot of my teachers tell me that the way we learn in classes is something that they're forced to do by their superiors, like the people in charge, and it's they try their best to make it immersive, but I definitely think that we need like a rehaul of our infrastructure of how we teach languages.
Uh, Yes, let me back up for a second. If I was making any criticism of teachers, it's not the teachers. They
Yeah,
are forced by
exactly.
the
Yeah.
administrations and
Hmm.
the bureaucracies in the education department to do these things. So,
Yeah,
yes.
it is what it is.
Alaville, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, very interesting. So my son Alex was sharing about his experience, and unfortunately, even though they are Filipino, they really struggle with the language because they grew up here in Saudi Arabia, and the friends that they made all speak English, and they rarely hear the language spoken among the youth. And also, they were growing up watching YouTube, so sometimes they even have the British accent
Yeah.
more because of Peppa Pig.
Yeah, that's
And that's something that they struggle with. And the reality is, even in the Philippines,
hmm
there are a lot of kids
yeah.
who are growing up there and still they don't speak Filipino well.
Hmm.
So that's something to be worried about. But at the same time, your presentation is very inspiring and will really give us more, encouragement to try and do something better.
Yeah.
This is not something that we have to continue struggling with. We can find ways to make it more interesting and hopefully really be
Hmm.
better at the language.
Yeah, I agree because in India, I've heard from some of my family members that in places that are more modern, they don't teach Hindi anymore and they just learn English, and some of them don't even know how to speak Hindi. So I think that erasure of like native languages is also a very big problem of indigenous languages. But I definitely think by making languages more interesting, it'll be easier for kids to learn them, and for people, for immigrants and things like that, it'll be easier for them to keep up with their native language if they use more interesting methods. But yeah, I think that's a great point.
I'd also like to mention I read this book about a girl who couldn't really fit in. She started learning sign language and she realized that sign language is a really interesting way to speak because you don't have to worry about accent and not saying stuff, it was very comfortable for jump in or say conversation. It felt very respectful, very easy, and
Yeah,
just
he might have. Yeah, but I definitely agree with him. That's a really good point because yeah, in ASL and like different sign languages, there is no accent, which I think accent can be sometimes it makes us feel embarrassed when we're speaking another language, but I think it's one of the things that we have to power through. But I'm glad that sign language is getting more widespread and more popular because it's another form of language that is often like overlooked. But our school started an ASL class recently, so I think that it will also be great if sign language and other languages like that are more integrated into our curriculum and are just more widespread, maybe to give people more options because a lot of times we're focused on the mainstream languages, but we don't have that kind of diversity. But I think that also brings up like the good point about if you have an accent, I mean, it's not a bad thing. So you shouldn't feel embarrassed when you're speaking that language.
But then maybe that brings up another point about languages. So when you talk about a language, let's just pick on Spanish, for example. There are different versions of Spanish in the different countries, and I have been in situations where somebody from one country in a Spanish-speaking country has trouble understanding somebody from another country. Um, and so if you're trying to learn Spanish, are you learning Puerto Rican Spanish, Mexican Spanish, Venezuelan Spanish, Argentine Spanish? They're
That,
different.
that that's a really good point because yeah, the difference between Latin American Spanish, South American Spanish, Spain Spanish, and that's true for a lot of other languages. Arabic I know has very many dialects. Portuguese has Brazilian Portuguese and Portugal Portuguese. So I think that's a really good point. In a lot of the school systems, like our Spanish is just kind of it's mixed. Since we're in the US, we tend to kind of like borrow a lot more from Spain or Mexico Spanish, but I think that's also another issue with our traditional education. They don't really teach you where this comes from, what dialects are. They don't teach you about accents and things like that. It's just something that you have to pick up by yourself. But when self-studying, I think that's a really big thing to prioritize, is to understand the origin of these words, the culture that goes along with them, the nuance. Maybe this is only used in this place, this country. That's why I think when you're self-studying or just like supplement your language learning, it's a lot more important to learn about the culture of the place and to choose a dialect and maybe study that dialect more specifically. So yeah, I think that brings up a good point because all of the language is tied to culture. If you don't understand why someone in that country says it that way, I mean, it goes back to more cultural norms and things that are within that society that you also have to understand.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I had my own experiences in going back to Germany where I would go down to southern Germany and I had no idea what those people were saying. But then I've also been to southern United States and I had no idea what those people were saying. So
That's true. Yeah, it's true. The difference between dialects, accents, it can be difficult. That's for sure.
I think Alex is trying to talk, but he's muted.
because of my the problem, a lot of me trying to speak Filipino, but um it's a bit hard. I was trying to create this innovation. It's an it's a app, an AI app that instead of just like Duolingo, you speak it, you input some answers, find some answers. It'll speak back
Hmm, that's very nice.
and a couple of more innovations. But my main question is, um, especially for some inappropriate words, how do I kind of incorporate it into my app? Because I can't just leave it out. Is because you might maybe some accidentally use it, or your friends will be like,
Alex, you're thinking about
"Yes,
using inappropriate words. Do you realize your mother is listening?
oh no,
Yeah,
No, but he brings a really good point
point.
because actually that's what usually is being taught to new speakers, right? They are being taught the really bad words at the start. So if you don't know what you're saying, they're gonna fool you into saying that to your teacher or to somebody else.
oh I
Yeah.
got a lot of that when in my school, my Arabic school. They were uh teasing me in Arabic.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I think it's interesting because like younger kids, they tend to do that, or they tend to like teach you these bad words first. But then in actual classes in the traditional education system, they don't teach you any slang or any inappropriate words. So then you're unaware of them. So then it's something that I've had to learn by myself in Spanish and Japanese. So I think, I don't know, I feel like obviously you shouldn't be using these words because they're rude and they have a negative connotation, but I think they still should be taught or at least briefly mentioned just so that you know and you're aware of them. So I think that it's important to like emphasize that they're bad words, but it's also important to recognize them and like say that like what they are and make sure people know them. And I think Julie asked in the chat, what languages are on my horizon to learn next. This summer I will be learning my Korean, so hopefully it gets a lot better because I'm a beginner right now. And then hopefully in the future I'd like to learn and like make my Portuguese better. It's very similar to Spanish, but there's a lot of pronunciation difference and grammar. So I hope to learn some Portuguese and make it better so that I can reach a conversational level. Hi, Julie. So yeah.
You make me feel very lazy when it comes to languages. I'm
Right.
going to have to step up my language game to at least learn one more language now.
You can do it. It's never too late.
Even as old people, huh?
Yeah. Julie and Eleville, the next presenter is here and probably ready. Do you want to start them early or do you want to wait until the actual schedule?
In 3 minutes?
No, they're supposed to start in about 17 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I try not to do that unless they're volunteering to start early, just because it pushes that issue forward. Then we have a couple interesting videos we could play. I haven't done this for a while though, so I could mess things up. First, I want to say, Aarin, absolutely amazing presentation,
Thank you.
as
I do,
always.
I do have to go now, but I'll watch the live stream a little bit later.
Okay.
It was really
Thank
fun talking to all of you. Thank you.